And why is she sitting on the floor of her bedroom? Hi everybody, welcome to A Case of the Jills. I never show you guys where I live. I just thought I would give you a little view right now of my little land here. God, what a day, huh? It's incredible. There's a lot of noise going on downstairs in my house, so here we are. Today I thought we would do something a little bit different. On this channel, we're always talking about recovery. We've gotten into some bad habits and they led us to a place that wasn't quite healthy. And so we're always trying to figure out ways to get ourselves back. But what happens if you never become overtrained? What happens if you never lose your period to begin with? Is it possible? I would argue yes. So today we're going to talk about how to never suffer from overtraining syndrome and never lose your period. Now, it goes without saying that if I knew then what I know now, so I'm going to share it all with you. So let's try to understand a little bit about how this actually happens in the first place. Why do people suffer from overtraining syndrome? The simple fact is that it happens when there's a disconnect between your expectations and the realities of the physiology of your body. We get an idea in our head of what we should be doing, and then our body has a different idea. And let me be clear, this happens for a lot of reasons, none of which we should feel shameful about. But it is important to recognize that it's really not your body that's the problem. Your body is actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's your mindset, your motivation, and yes, your ego that is the problem. I realize that not everybody who watches this channel knows who I am, so let me just remind you. Yes, now I'm this lady who talks a lot about overtraining syndrome and hypothalamic amenorrhea, but 5 years ago, I was an ultra runner, and 5 years before that, I was a triathlete. And yes, I lost my period and suffered from overtraining syndrome, both. I made a lot of mistakes back then, and I've dedicated all of my time to explaining to people how they can recover from such situations. So when I'm telling you all of these things today, I'm telling you them from lots of experience. So now let's talk about that ego. Let me give you kind of a common example of where you might see this play out. How many times have you signed up for a race or gone on a run because a friend did? Irrespective of the fact that maybe that race was too close to another race and you didn't have enough recovery time, or maybe it was on a day that you were supposed to be taking as rest. Maybe it was a hard effort during a step back week that you should have been taking. There's two options. You don't perform well, or, and probably worse, you do perform well. Then you're trying to figure out why you feel terrible a week later. Is that your body doing something wrong? Or is that you making a choice that doesn't support your recovery? So let me give you some more examples of how your expectations can potentially become problematic to your actual physiology. First example, we've already talked about, plain old FOMO. The second way we might see this is if you become motivated or very much inspired by someone who is an elite or professional athlete that is performing at a level that might be a stretch for you. I've talked about this before on this channel where at the beginning of my career as an ultra runner, I was entirely enamored by a group of elite and professional athletes that were way beyond my ability level. But I became entranced by the romance of them going and running these super long distances and really felt that it was a viable goal for me. I didn't take into consideration the realities of my physiology. I was just enamored with the idea of just running forever. The third way we might see this is if someone is getting peer pressure from a team or their coach. Listen, I'm going to tell you something. A toxic environment is going to be toxic whether or not it's a coach that sanctions it. You may be on a team where everyone is behaving in a way that isn't consistent with the realities of physiology. Your entire team may be overtraining and overloading all the time under the direction of someone who's supposed to be an authority figure and know better. And just because everyone on your team has the same unhealthy practices doesn't mean that biology doesn't matter. Unfortunately, there's no herd immunity for overtraining syndrome. The fourth way you might see a disconnect between expectation and physiology is when someone is trying to use their sport to manipulate their body size, weight, shape, or composition. Anytime you're going to sacrifice nutrition for performance, one side of the equation is going to lose. You're either not going to have enough energy to perform well, or your body is going to be unable to keep up with the demand, and you're going to get sick. The fifth way we might see this is if you feel that you cannot stop training because you need it for your mental health. We've talked about this a lot on this channel, and we've had guest speakers come and speak to this issue directly. You do not need as much physical activity as you think in order to get a mental health boost. I refer you to the video we did on this channel with Dr. Emily Bernstein. Remember in that video she talked about the fact that all you really need is about 30 minutes of steady state aerobic activity just a few times a week in order to really get a mental health boost. You certainly do not need to be running 5 hours to achieve that. However, if we are lacking in building up some of our other mental health care tools, we might feel that exercise is the only way to get that boost. And the last way we might see this disconnect between physiology and expectations is probably the worst one. This is the one where we equate our participation with self-worth. So when you have a rest day, you don't feel as good about yourself as you do on a day where you're training. So guess what? You always train. I'm gonna say that most of you probably recognized yourself in one of those examples. I know I certainly did. So what do we do now? How do we fight this? How do we make sure we never get sick? Auntie Jill's here to tell you. These are in no particular order, but let's start with number 1. Purposeful periodization of training. Periodization of training is not sexy. It's more prudent than anything else. God, that's a lot of P's. It's based on the fact that we cannot continue a linear progression toward an increase in volume and intensity without recovery. And therefore we structure our training sort of on cycles. There's 2 types of cycles that we typically talk about: macrocycles and microcycles. We're gonna break this down using running because it's the sport that I know the best, and also it's kind of an easy one because there's a clearly defined off season, or at least there used to be. So starting in the winter months, your mileage is gonna be lower. You are going to be doing more cross training, more strength, more stretching. Your overall volume and intensity of running is gonna be lower. This is a crucial time of the year because basically you're storing up your resources for when you head into a more build phase in the spring. The spring is that build phase. That's where you're going to be increasing your volume and intensity in preparation for race season. Common wisdom is to not increase by more than 10% of your volume and intensity per week, making sure that you progress forward 3 weeks and then you step back on the 4th week. You will sensibly add speed work, tempo work, fartlek runs. And if you're really serious about your running career, hopefully you're doing this with someone who is a coach who can help you sort of navigate these increases without blowing yourself up. Now we head into summer, which is race season. And ideally what you'll do is take your rest week before your big event. You'll compete in your race and then you'll take the week after or more, depending on the distance, to recover from that effort. Race season is not the time to be building. It is not the time to do extra speed work. You're going to conserve all of your resources for your races and spend a lot of time recovering. That's an example of a macro cycle. An example of a microcycle is simply making sure that you work in rest days every single week. Not every single day can be a top volume and intensity day. So making sure you cycle through easy and hard efforts in a week is extremely important. Oh, and by the way, you know on this channel, I do not believe in active rest days. I believe in laying on the couch with your laptop on your belly and some serious Netflix time. Now, this is gonna change, obviously, if you're a gym athlete. While the seasons and the competitions might be slightly different, the methodology is the same. You cannot think that you can ever increase volume and intensity. Cycling your training, incorporating rest days, and thinking about your year and your week is very important. The second way you can make sure that you never get overtraining syndrome is to pick your races ahead of time and stick to your plan. Back when I was still running, I would pull out my calendar and queue up ultrasignup.com, and I would pick my 3 or 4 races for the summertime in January. Problem was that I would also check UltraSignup 3 months after that and maybe a couple weeks after that and keep adding races as they were interesting to me. This is a recipe for disaster. If you're able to stay disciplined and stick to your prior schedule, you are not going to overdo. We get into trouble when we think that just because there is a race every weekend, we need to be racing every weekend. Do not race out of boredom. Do not race to control your weight. Do not race to join a friend because they say they want a pacer. Race when it's your time to race. Pick that ahead of time and you'll never get into trouble. One more thing to note when it comes to picking races, varying your distance is a great way to make sure that you are never gonna burn out. If you're an ultra runner and every single race you run is a 100-miler, you are going to have a very short career. Nothing wrong with running a 10K every now and then. Number 3 tip, keep your emotions separate from your training. Let me say that again. Keep your emotions separate from your training. Training is something that you do. It is not who you are. You might want to repeat that one again too. Managing your emotions is a skill. It takes patience and wisdom, and it's something that will serve you for life. Drowning out those emotions, numbing yourself out, deflecting your emotions through training, it's not sustainable. Your body gets beat up. Issues never really get addressed, and you just reinforce the message that you absolutely can't handle yourself without training. It goes without saying that this can be managed also with a counselor, a therapist, some mental health care practitioner that can help you navigate your emotions and not beat your body up as a result of it. And number 4 way you can make sure that you never get sick is to eat for your body and your mind. Do not restrict. Eat all macronutrients. Eat consistently throughout the day. Work with a dietitian if you feel that you need additional support. It takes a lot of energy to move your body every day, yes, but it also takes a lot of energy to keep your brain functioning. You must fuel every day and be consistent at it. Do not become romanticized by the idea of a particular body type as it is associated with a particular sport. If you find yourself more interested in your sport because of what you think it's going to make your body look like, that's something to look at. Make sure that you are always, always, always prioritizing the health of your body and your mind and not some aesthetic goal. That's how you don't get sick. Number 5, rest is training. You cannot skip it. I can't tell you how many times and how frustrating it is to me to see people that I actually think are excellent athletes talk about how they have such a hard time having a rest day. You can tell a lot about a person by how uncomfortable they are with the concept of rest days and what they find themselves doing on those days. Oopsie. Rest day is actually the most important day in your training. That good work that you've been doing out there has a chance to actually make magic in your body. That's when your muscles heal, they get stronger. Remember that rest is not just about taking a rest day, it's also incorporating those low volume months that we talked about in periodization of training. It is also making sure that you're getting enough sleep. The next tip for making sure that you never suffer from overtraining syndrome is to clean up your social media. Watch what you're consuming. Sports social media can become an echo chamber. You start to think that this type of thing is normal. When all you consume is Strava data and shots of people running through mountains, everyone's doing a 20-miler this week, you start to think that it's no big deal. Kind of looks like every single person you know has 15% body fat. Your reality gets skewed. We have to constantly curate our social media to make sure that the images that we're seeing are not giving us a false sense of reality. If we're basing our training on the kind of stuff we're consuming, that could become problematic. The next way is to make sure that you pay attention to what your body is trying to tell you and do not ignore symptoms. So let's run through some of the things that you might start to notice in your body if you are headed down the path of overtraining. The first part of this list is applicable to any gender. You're going to experience fatigue, gastrointestinal issues, severe muscle soreness. You're gonna have some little injuries that never seem to go away. You also might get frequent colds. You're gonna have inconsistent sleep or insomnia. You might have mega food cravings, particularly in the area of sugar and carbohydrate. You're gonna experience blood sugar dips and get real hangry. You might be irritable, you might have an increased amount of anxiety, and you may feel depressed. Now, if you're a female and you're starting to experience the effects of overtraining, you may have a longer period cycle, meaning more than 35 days. You may start skipping periods. You may have a very heavy period with a really bad PMS. Or you may have a very short luteal phase, so the phase between ovulation and when you actually get your period. If it's less than 10 days, yeah, that's something to look at. For men, you may also experience things like low libido. You may have a noticeable change in whether or not you have an erection in the morning. You also may experience impotence. These are all signs that your body is struggling to recover and you are on the verge of burnout. And the final tip to make sure that you never suffer from overtraining syndrome, remember that life stress plus training stress is total stress. It's the overall load of stress that causes the problems. What I mean by that is that training for Ironman while you're going through a divorce may not be the best idea. If you're going through emotional or personal stress while you are really trying for lots of high volume and intensity training, all of that stuff is gonna add up and burn you out quicker. You might do fine in the short term, and that's because your body is actually designed to help you get through those short periods of stress. But at a certain point, your body won't be able to help you anymore. And then the bottom falls out. All of this to say is that lots of times we make decisions about our training that really don't have to do with whether or not they help us achieve a performance goal. We tie in all kinds of things, cultural, personal, emotional, into our training, where it doesn't really belong. We're using a sport to tell a story to ourselves about ourselves, and that's where we tend to abuse things. Here's a great litmus test. If you find yourself spending a lot of time thinking about how great you looked and how great your performance was like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 months ago, and you feel like you can't get back to your previous glory, you might be making choices that sacrifice your physiological health for some concept that you had about the glory days. Well, I hope that this was helpful. I hope that there's some of you watching this channel right now who will never become overtrained and will never lose their period and will never experience any of the negative effects of pushing too hard. I would love it if you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who you think might benefit. You can find me on Instagram at @acaseofthejills. If you have questions, you can email me at caseofthejills@gmail.com. I hope that you have a great week wherever you are, and I will see you again soon. If you're still watching this, wow. Thanks for watching.